Hey, this is the Crisis of a Reader, and I am actually going to do a top 5 Saturday, depending on when I actually post this video. Hopefully it stays the top 5 Saturday, and all of my Saturdays will be top 5, but we'll see. I don't know if I can do them weekly yet. So far it's just going to be monthly, but it is my goal to get them done weekly. We'll see. So for this top 5 Saturday, I decided to do books that have inspired me most. These are books that have inspired me as a writer. So nothing else, just writing stuff since I'm a hybrid channel. So for my number 5, I actually decided to go with Illuminae. I absolutely loved how they did this story. They told it through note cards, they told it through email, text messages, notes to each other, not note cards. But I'm pretty sure there were like pieces. It was awesome. And it wasn't the standard reading from left to right. You got to read it in different artistic formats as you read the book. It was just really unique and it was really different. So I've actually started thinking about things I wanted to do with my science fantasy books that would be told in a different light, in a different style, in a different format that would be artistic, but could still tell the story and get that characterization and world building that most other books couldn't do. So number 4 on my list is actually a twofer. I have George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire and J.R.R. Tolkien's series. I absolutely love these two just because they did world building, they created their own fantasy races, they created their own languages, they created their own worlds. And I really want to do that with my different fantasy realms. I want to create completely different worlds and languages and races that people have never heard of that will help to build that up in fantasy, because you get tired of always seeing elves or always seeing orcs. I really kind of want to like expand that and show people that you can do so much more than just sticking to the regular what you've always seen in fantasy. Kind of going back to those tropes that you really want to branch out, you really want to be different. So number 3 is actually a tomb. It was huge for me and it was a huge accomplishment, but I actually read Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I really love the book just because he was able to bring female characters in and have that perspective and do it really well, especially for his time. So I absolutely love the characters just because of what they went through and how they were portrayed. All of the characters were very unique, very different. They all had their own problems. I absolutely loved it just because it took place in a different country. It wasn't in the US, it was Russia, for those who don't know. It was really cool. And the biggest thing was the characters. Absolutely love the characters. They really like drove it home with the story. I keep thinking about that book whenever I think about it. So this one goes back to high school. Number 2 on my list is actually Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I ended up getting into this really huge reading slump where I just didn't feel like reading at all. And then Mary Shelley's Frankenstein came along and I fell in love with voices, of course. I fell in love with her sense of diction. I love that I fell in love with the monster rather than I don't really care about Dr. Frankenstein at all. I just cared about the monster, which is what you were supposed to do, I think. It's more of a horror story for some people because it goes from, it's like science versus religion, or should we do the things that we're capable of in science? Because this was going back to where people could shoot electricity through a body and reanimate it. I'm quite sure that's what influenced her to write this book. I'd have to look that up to make sure. But I absolutely ended up loving, of course, the characters. I loved her characterization, and it just motivated me more to kind of have a whole, you know, monsters don't have to be monsters. The monsters can be normal people. And that's what I really saw in Dr. Frankenstein, was that he was the jerk. He was the one that should have died in the end. I'm quite sure he did. It's been a really long time since I read it, but it really inspired me in that way. So at my number 1 is actually Fairy Wars by Herbie Brennan. Even though the series kind of takes a turn and goes downhill after the first book will always have a special place in my heart just because it was really what got me into fantasy. And it really got me into wanting to write constantly in that realm. And it wasn't until later when I'm like, oh, originally I really wanted to just stick to science fiction. And then I started reading Fairy Wars, and I'm like, maybe there is a chance that I can do everything that I want to do in fantasy without anybody. I don't know. It's like I had this thought that fantasy was only one thing, and I couldn't change it at all. And Fairy Wars was just that portal fantasy where I'm like, wow, this can be really different. And that's when I decided this one series that I'm working on, that's a fantasy that has different races, that has different languages, that explores relationships, that explores a different world. So it's really cool to see all of these authors that have really changed me through showing me how well they do characterization, how well they world build, and how they tell a story in different facets and different avenues. It's just really cool. So that was my top 5 Saturday. Thanks.